The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the cramped study room, casting harsh shadows across Kestrel Voss's differential equations textbook. Her mechanical pencil scratched against graph paper, calculating stress loads on theoretical bridge supports, while her classmates at Cal Poly cramped for their own engineering finals. The digital clock read 11:47 p.m. 3 hours until her structural analysis exam, and she'd been running on energy drinks and determination since Tuesday. That's when the door exploded inward. Wood splinters showered the linoleum as four figures in full tactical gear swept into the room, rifle barrels tracking corners with practiced precision. Students screamed, diving under desks, but the lead operator's eyes found Kestrel immediately through his night vision goggles. She sat frozen, pencil still poised over a half-finished equation, watching the green laser dot settle on her chest. Kestrel Voss, the SEAL called through his calm mask, voice distorted but unmistakably urgent. We need to talk, now. Her stomach dropped. Nobody at the university knew about her previous life. She'd buried Lieutenant Commander Kestrel Nomad, Voss 6 years ago after the incident over the South China Sea, trading her wings for textbooks, her flight suit for jeans and hoodies. She was supposed to be just another veteran using her GI Bill, invisible among thousands of other students. Her transcript read, prior military service, in bland bureaucratic language that revealed nothing about the classified missions, the lives saved, or the nightmare that ended it all. I think you have the wrong person, she managed, though her hands trembled against the desk. The lead SEAL pulled off his helmet, revealing a weathered face she didn't recognize, but eyes that held the weight of desperate authority. Ma'am, 6 hours ago, a Chinese hypersonic missile took out our carrier strike group in the Philippine Sea. The USS Gerald Ford is gone, 3,000 sailors. Our F-35 squadrons are scattered and we've got enemy fighters pushing toward Guam. He stepped closer, lowering his weapon. Command pulled your service record, every classified flight. Every impossible mission you flew before the Pentagon buried you in paperwork. Whatever happened 6 years ago, they're willing to forget it. Kestrel's pencil slipped from numb fingers. The equations blurred as memories flooded back unbidden. The roar of twin engines, the weight of the stick in her hands, the radio chatter that had haunted her dreams. She'd sworn never to fly military again, had built a new life from the wreckage of the old one. But the SEAL's next words shattered that fragile peace. We've got one experimental fighter left. Prototype designation, Ghost Raptor. No pilot qualified to fly it. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than any shout. Except you. The engineering textbook seemed to mock her now, its neat formulas unable to calculate the probability of survival, the stress fractures in a soul that had already broken once. Outside, the California night waited, while somewhere across the Pacific, war had already begun. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting dancing shadows that looked almost like aircraft wings against the walls. Kestrel closed her eyes and felt the phantom sensation of altitude, the horizon tilting as invisible engines spooled up in her memory. She'd thought she could escape the sky. She'd been wrong. When she opened her eyes, the SEALs were waiting for her answer. Through the shattered doorway, she could hear sirens in the distance, growing closer. The normal world was already fragmenting around the edges, reality bending toward the inevitable conclusion she tried so hard to avoid. Her fingers found the dog tags she still wore beneath her civilian clothes, metal warm against her skin. How long do I have to decide? She asked, though they all knew she'd already made her choice the moment they'd spoken her call sign aloud. Nomad. The pilot who flew alone, who brought everyone home, who disappeared into academic anonymity rather than face the consequences of being too good at a job that demanded everything and forgave nothing. The SEAL checked his watch with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd calculated time in heartbeats and ammunition counts. Transport's on the roof. We lift off in 5 minutes. Kestrel stood slowly, her chair scraping against linoleum that suddenly seemed a universe away from the cockpit she'd abandoned. Her classmates stared from their hiding places, unable to process the transformation they were witnessing. The quiet girl who sat in the back row, who never spoke unless called upon, was shedding her civilian skin like a snake. When she straightened to her full height, something shifted in the room's atmosphere, as if the air itself recognized the predator that had been hiding among prey. 5 minutes, she repeated, her voice carrying the first hint of the authority she'd buried. Then we see if I remember how to fly. The night sky over San Luis Obispo stretched endlessly above them, stars gleaming like navigation points on an invisible chart. Somewhere out there, beyond the curvature of the earth, enemy fighters were already in the air. The war had begun without her, but it wouldn't end that way. Kestrel gathered her things, not her textbooks or study guides, but the leather flight jacket she'd hidden in her locker, the aviator sunglasses that had never left her backpack, the tactical watch that still kept military time despite 6 years of civilian life. As they moved toward the roof, she caught her reflection in the building's glass doors. The scared college student was gone, replaced by something harder, more focused. Her shoulders set in lines the SEALs recognized, her stride shifting to the controlled gait of someone comfortable with dangerous machinery and split-second decisions. The transformation was almost supernatural, as if the mere mention of her call sign had awakened something that had only been sleeping, never truly dead. The helicopter waited on the landing pad, rotors already spinning, navigation lights cutting through the darkness like red and green stars. Its crew chief waved them aboard with practiced urgency, while the pilot kept the engines at flight idle, ready for immediate departure. Kestrel felt the familiar vibration through her boots, the thrumming that had once been as natural as her heartbeat. She'd forgotten how much she'd missed it until now. As they lifted off into the California night, banking east toward Nevada, and whatever experimental fighter waited for her, Kestrel pressed her face to the window and watched the university lights fade below. Her engineering textbooks lay abandoned on the study room floor, her final exam forgotten. She was no longer a student preparing for a civilian career. She was nomad again, climbing toward altitude, toward a war that had found her despite every effort to hide. The desert stretched beneath them, dark and infinite, while ahead lay the unknown aircraft that only she could fly. The SEALs briefed her through their headsets, voices crackling with technical specifications and tactical updates, but Kestrel found herself listening to something else entirely. The sound of engines in her memory, the ghost of her former life calling her home to the place she'd never really left. The sky was reclaiming its own. The experimental hangar at Tonopah Test Range appeared out of the Nevada darkness like a monument to aeronautical impossibility. Floodlights carved geometric patterns across the tarmac, while armed guards moved in precise patterns around the perimeter. The helicopter settled onto the landing pad with barely a bump, its crew chief already lowering the rear ramp before the rotors stopped spinning. Kestrel stepped onto American soil feeling like she'd crossed more than geographical distance. She'd crossed back into a world she'd sworn to leave forever. Colonel Marcus Wright waited at the hangar entrance, his uniform pressed despite the late hour, ribbons arranged in perfect rows that spoke of campaigns she recognized, and some she didn't. His face was weathered by years of difficult decisions, but his eyes held the sharp focus of a man who'd learned to calculate acceptable losses in human terms. When he saluted, it was with the crisp precision of someone who understood that ceremony mattered even in desperate circumstances. "Colonel Wright, Ghost Squadron Commander," he said, returning his hand to his side. "We've got 18 hours before the Chinese Air Force reaches Guam. After that, they own the Pacific." He turned without waiting for her response, expecting her to follow. "Your bird's inside. We've been waiting 2 years to find someone qualified to fly her." The hangar doors parted like a curtain rising on the final act of an opera, revealing the Ghost Raptor in all its impossible beauty. The aircraft seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, its surfaces crafted from materials that bent physics to their will. Angular lines flowed into curves that suggested speed even at rest, while twin engines nested in nacelles that looked more grown than manufactured. It was larger than the F-22 she'd flown in her previous life, but somehow gave the impression of barely contained velocity, as if it might launch itself skyward through will alone. "Jesus Christ," she whispered, her professional composure cracking for the first time since the SEALs had found her. "What the hell did you build?" Wright's smile held no warmth, only the satisfaction of a man who'd finally found the right tool for an impossible job. Something that can fly Mach 4 without afterburners. Something with stealth capabilities that make the B-2 look like a crop duster. Something that can carry ordnance loads that would make a B-52 jealous. He paused beside the aircraft's nose, running his hand along surfaces that seemed to shift in the harsh hangar lighting. "Problem is, the flight control systems are so advanced that our best pilots can't handle the neural load. The interface is designed for someone with perfect spatial awareness and reaction times measured in microseconds." Kestrel walked slowly around the aircraft, her trained eye cataloging details that spoke to revolutionary engineering. The cockpit canopy was seamless glass that provided 360-degree visibility, while sensor arrays were integrated so smoothly into the airframe that they were nearly invisible. This wasn't just an evolution of existing technology. It was a quantum leap into something entirely new. "How many pilots have you lost trying to fly this thing?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer from Wright's expression. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only outward sign of memories he'd rather not revisit. "7," he said quietly, "all good pilots. The interface overloaded their systems during high-G maneuvers. They couldn't process the information flow." He met her eyes with the steady gaze of a man who'd learned to carry guilt without being crushed by it. "But your psychological profile suggests you might be different. That incident 6 years ago, whatever it was that made command bury your file, the psychologists think it rewired your brain somehow. Made you capable of processing impossible amounts of sensory data, while maintaining perfect combat effectiveness." The incident. Kestrel's hands clenched involuntarily as memories threatened to surface. The mission that had gone wrong, the choices she'd made, the lives that had hung in the balance while she'd pushed her F-22 beyond its design limits and somehow brought everyone home. She'd paid a price for that success, spent months in psychological evaluation, while Pentagon analysts tried to understand how she'd accomplished the impossible. They'd eventually classified the entire mission, buried her service record, and quietly suggested she might be happier in civilian life. "The Ghost Raptor's neural interface is calibrated for someone with your specific psychological markers," Wright continued. "You're not just qualified to fly this aircraft. You might be the only person alive who can handle what it demands of a pilot." He gestured toward the maintenance crew that was already prepping the aircraft for flight. "We've got your gear ready. Flight suits been modified for the new interface systems. All we need is your consent to begin integration training." Kestrel reached out to touch the aircraft's wing, feeling the subtle vibration of dormant systems humming just below the threshold of perception. The Ghost Raptor seemed to recognize her touch, its surfaces warming slightly under her palm. For a moment, she imagined she could feel its hunger for the sky, its desire to prove itself in combat against impossible odds. It was a machine built for war, but designed with an artistry that transcended mere function. "Integration training," she repeated, testing the words. "How long?" Wright checked his watch with the mechanical precision of a man who'd learned to measure time in tactical advantages and missed opportunities. 6 hours of simulator time. Then we put you in the cockpit for real and see if the interface accepts you." His voice carried the weight of consequences neither of them wanted to contemplate. "If it works, you launch at dawn with a full combat loadout. If it doesn't—" He let the sentence hang unfinished, but they both understood the implications. The maintenance crew worked around them with the quiet efficiency of professionals who knew their jobs might mean the difference between victory and defeat. Kestrel watched them prep the aircraft, noting the care they took with each system, the way they moved around the Ghost Raptor as if it were a living thing rather than a machine. These were people who understood what they'd built, who took pride in creating something that might change the balance of power in the Pacific. 6 hours, she said, making the calculation in her head. Then we find out if I'm still the pilot I used to be or just another casualty waiting to happen. Wright nodded, recognizing the acceptance in her voice, the subtle shift from civilian uncertainty to military resolve. "Welcome back to active duty, Nomad," he said, using her call sign for the first time. "Let's go see if you can still earn your wings." The simulator bay hummed with the contained energy of sophisticated electronics pushed to their operational limits. Banks of processors lined the walls, their cooling fans creating a constant whisper of white noise, while holographic projectors cast false starlight across surfaces that existed only in digital space. Kestrel stood before the Ghost Raptor's cockpit mock-up, identical in every detail to the real aircraft waiting in the hangar, studying instruments that seemed more intuitive than logical, as if designed by someone who understood flight at a level deeper than mere engineering. "Neural interface headset," the technician explained, holding up a device that looked more like a crown than military hardware. Silver filaments caught the harsh fluorescent light, while sensor pads gleamed with the dull sheen of medical-grade electronics. "It monitors your brain activity in real time, translates your intentions into flight commands. The aircraft becomes an extension of your nervous system rather than a machine you control." His hands moved with the careful precision of someone who'd spent months perfecting the interface protocols. Most pilots find the sensation overwhelming at first. Kestrel accepted the headset, feeling its weight distribute across her skull as the technician made minor adjustments to the sensor placement. The moment the system activated, her perception shifted subtly, as if the boundaries of her awareness had suddenly expanded beyond her physical form. The simulator cockpit remained the same, but something had changed in how she related to its controls, its displays, its fundamental purpose. "Systems coming online," Colonel Wright's voice filtered through her headset, distorted by layers of electronic processing. Heart rate steady, brain activity within normal parameters, initiating basic flight protocols. The simulator's engine spooled up with a sound that bypassed her ears and resonated directly through her bones, while synthetic horizon lines painted themselves across her vision in colors that existed nowhere in nature. The first few minutes passed like a fever dream. Control inputs that should have required conscious thought flowed from intention to execution without conscious processing, as if the Ghost Raptor had always been part of her body and she was simply remembering how to move. Bank left, climb, roll inverted. Each maneuver felt natural despite the aircraft's impossible performance characteristics. The neural interface translated her desires into precise flight commands, while simultaneously feeding her sensory data that would have overloaded any conventional pilot. "Mach 2.5 and climbing," Wright's voice carried a note of amazement that he tried to suppress. "G-forces should have knocked you unconscious 3 minutes ago, but your biometrics are still green. Whatever that incident did to your brain chemistry, it's working." The simulator painted enemy fighters across her tactical display, red icons appearing at the edge of sensor range like digital harbingers of aerial combat. Kestrel's response came without conscious thought, her hands moving across controls she'd never touched while her mind processed targeting solutions with mathematical precision. The Ghost Raptor banked through a high-G turn that would have shattered the wings of any conventional aircraft, its experimental engines maintaining thrust through maneuvers that defied several laws of physics. Enemy missiles tracked across her display like deadly fireflies, but she danced between them with an elegance that made evasion look like choreography. "Target lock," she announced, her voice calm despite the impossible complexity of the combat scenario unfolding around her. Fox 2. The simulated missile launch felt satisfying in a way that transcended mere training, as if the Ghost Raptor had been designed specifically for her hands, her reflexes, her particular brand of tactical thinking. The enemy fighter exploded in a bloom of digital fire while she was already acquiring the next target. The engagement lasted 17 minutes. When the simulation ended, Kestrel sat in the cooling cockpit while the neural interface slowly disengaged, reality returning in stages like consciousness after deep sleep. Her hands shook slightly as adrenaline faded, but her mind remained crystal clear, cataloging lessons learned and tactical possibilities that hadn't existed an hour ago. The Ghost Raptor hadn't just accepted her, it had embraced her, made her part of itself in ways that conventional training had never achieved. 7 enemy fighters destroyed, Wright announced, his voice carrying a mix of relief and professional satisfaction. 0 damage to your aircraft, flight time from base to target and back 43 minutes. He paused, consulting readings that must have seemed impossible. You were pulling 12 GS in some of those turns. The interface compensated perfectly. No pilot blackout, no loss of consciousness, no degradation in combat effectiveness. Kestrel removed the neural interface headset, feeling oddly disconnected from her own body after the seamless integration with the simulated aircraft. Her reflection in the darkened displays showed someone transformed, as if the brief flight had awakened capabilities that had been dormant rather than absent. The scared college student was completely gone now, replaced by a predator who understood her natural habitat and the tools of her trade. How did it feel? Wright asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer from her biometric readouts. Kestrel considered the question, searching for words adequate to describe an experience that transcended ordinary piloting. Like coming home, she said finally. Like remembering something I'd forgotten I knew. She stood slowly, muscles adjusting to gravity after the simulated high-G maneuvers. When do we do it for real? Wright smiled for the first time since she'd met him, the expression transforming his weathered features into something almost paternal. Dawn, he replied. Your aircraft will be armed and fueled by 500 hours. Mission briefing at 4:30. You'll launch at first light with a full combat loadout, air-to-air missiles, precision-guided munitions, everything the Ghost Raptor can carry. His expression grew serious again. Intelligence suggests the Chinese are massing their best squadrons for a final push against our positions. This might be our only chance to show them what American engineering can accomplish when we stop playing by conventional rules. The hangar had transformed during her simulator session, becoming a hive of focused activity as maintenance crews performed final systems checks on the Ghost Raptor. Ordnance teams moved with practiced efficiency, loading weapons that represented the cutting edge of American military technology onto hardpoints that had been designed to carry payloads no conventional fighter could handle. The aircraft itself seemed different somehow, as if it too were preparing for the mission that would define its operational legacy. Kestrel walked the length of her fighter, running pre-flight checks that were as much ritual as necessity. Every surface, every system, every minute detail received her attention while she mentally rehearsed the mission profile that would take her across the Pacific toward an enemy that had never faced anything like the Ghost Raptor. The aircraft responded to her presence like a thoroughbred horse sensing its rider's approach, systems warming under her hands, displays flickering to life in anticipation of flight. She's beautiful, someone said behind her. Kestrel turned to find a young maintenance sergeant watching her work, his expression holding the mix of pride and concern she'd seen on countless ground crew faces over the years. Been working on her for 18 months. Never thought I'd see her actually fly a combat mission. His name tape read Rodriguez, and his hands bore the calluses of someone who understood aircraft from the inside out. What's her name? Kestrel asked, noting the lack of nose art or squadron markings that would typically identify a military aircraft. Rodriguez smiled, the expression lighting up features that had been shaped by years of careful work in dangerous environments. Officially, Ghost Raptor prototype designation XF-47. He ran his hand along the aircraft's flank with the affection of a craftsman for his masterpiece. but the crew calls her Phantom. She's fast as hell, quiet as death, and meaner than a snake when you point her at something that needs killing. His voice carried the pride of someone who'd invested months of his life in perfecting a machine that might change the course of history. Phantom. The name felt right somehow, carrying implications of stealth and lethality that matched the aircraft's revolutionary capabilities. Kestrel nodded her approval while mentally adding the name to her growing connection with the fighter. Every good pilot knew their aircraft's personality, its quirks and preferences, the subtle ways it communicated its needs and capabilities. The Ghost Raptor was already speaking to her in languages she was only beginning to understand. "Take care of her up there," Rodriguez continued, his voice dropping to the serious tone that ground crew reserved for pilots about to face combat. "She's got systems we've never tested in real combat conditions. If something goes wrong—" He let the thought hang unfinished, but Kestrel understood his concern. "I'll bring her home," she promised, meaning it. "Both of us." Rodriguez nodded, recognizing the professional commitment in her voice, the bond between pilot and aircraft that transcended mere technical specifications. The dawn briefing took place in a conference room that smelled of coffee and anxiety, its walls covered with tactical displays showing enemy positions across the Western Pacific. Red icons marked Chinese air defense installations, while blue symbols indicated friendly forces that seemed pitifully outnumbered given the scope of the engagement ahead. Colonel Wright stood at the head of the table, his uniform crisp despite the early hour, while intelligence officers arranged classified documents with the careful precision of people who understood the weight of secrets. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wright began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd learned to project confidence even in desperate circumstances. "As of 300 hours, Chinese forces have established air superiority over a corridor stretching from the South China Sea to within 50 miles of Guam. Our conventional fighters have been unable to penetrate their defensive screen." He gestured toward the tactical display, where red zones marked areas of enemy control that seemed to be expanding by the hour. "The Ghost Raptor represents our best hope of disrupting their operational tempo," he continued, his eyes finding Kestrel's across the briefing room. "Your mission is to penetrate their air defense network and eliminate high-value targets that conventional forces cannot reach. Primary objective: destroy their airborne early warning aircraft operating out of mobile bases in the disputed territories. Secondary objective: engage and eliminate enemy fighters as targets of opportunity present themselves." The intelligence officer, a thin woman whose major's insignia gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, took over the briefing with the clipped efficiency of someone who'd learned to distill complex information into actionable intelligence. Enemy composition includes J-20 stealth fighters, upgraded J-16 multi-role aircraft, and at least 2 squadrons of Su-35 air superiority fighters. They're operating under cover of mobile surface-to-air missile systems that have thus far proven effective against our conventional aircraft. Kestrel studied the tactical display, her mind automatically calculating approach vectors, engagement envelopes, and escape routes that would maximize the Ghost Raptor's advantages while minimizing exposure to enemy defenses. The mission parameters were challenging but not impossible, provided the experimental aircraft performed as advertised and her own skills hadn't degraded during 6 years of civilian life. "Rules of engagement are weapons-free," Wright added, his voice carrying implications that everyone in the room understood. "You are authorized to engage any military target that poses a threat to friendly forces or mission accomplishment. Time on station will be limited by fuel considerations, approximately 40 minutes of combat operations before you'll need to return to base." He paused, meeting her eyes directly. "This is not a training exercise. The enemy is skilled, well-equipped, and highly motivated. They will try to kill you." The briefing concluded with technical specifications, communication protocols, and emergency procedures that Kestrel absorbed with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd learned to process tactical information under stress. But her mind was already moving beyond the briefing room, calculating flight profiles and combat scenarios, while her body prepared for the physical demands of high-G maneuvering in an experimental aircraft that pushed the boundaries of human endurance. "Questions?" Wright asked, though his expression suggested he'd be surprised if she had any. Kestrel shook her head, her confidence growing as the mission parameters solidified in her mind. She'd flown more dangerous missions in less capable aircraft, though never with stakes quite this high or equipment quite this revolutionary. "No, sir," she replied, rising from her chair with the controlled grace of someone who'd learned to move efficiently in flight gear. "I'm ready." Wright nodded, recognizing the professional certainty in her voice, the subtle transformation from civilian academic to combat pilot that had been occurring since the SEALs had found her in that college study room. "Then let's go see what the Ghost Raptor can do in combat," he said, leading her toward the hangar where her aircraft waited in the pre-dawn darkness. "God help us all." The pre-dawn air carried the metallic taste of aviation fuel and the subtle ozone scent of high-voltage electronics preparing for combat operations. Kestrel walked across the tarmac toward the Ghost Raptor, her flight suit crackling with static electricity, while overhead stars faded toward the horizon like navigation lights being extinguished one by one. The aircraft sat in a pool of floodlight illumination, its surfaces drinking light rather than reflecting it, while ground crew moved around its perimeter with the careful choreography of professionals who understood that mistakes in the next few minutes could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. "Pre-flight complete," Sergeant Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd spent the night ensuring every system met specifications that existed nowhere else in the world. "All ordnance loaded and verified. Neural interface calibrated to your specific parameters from last night's simulator session. She's ready for war." His expression mixed pride with concern, the way a parent might look at a child departing for dangerous territory. Kestrel accepted her helmet from the crew chief, feeling its weight distribute across her skull as sophisticated electronics came online around her. The neural interface headset nested inside the helmet's shell, its sensor arrays already beginning to map her brain activity in preparation for the seamless integration that would transform her from pilot into something approaching cybernetic organism. The heads-up display flickered to life, painting flight data across her vision in symbols that seemed more intuitive than learned. "Phantom," she whispered, using the aircraft's unofficial name for the first time. "Let's see what you can do." The Ghost Raptor's engines responded to her approach with a subtle shift in harmonics, as if recognizing her voice, her presence, her commitment to the mission that would define both their legacies. Systems that had been dormant during the night watch began cycling through startup sequences, while the aircraft's experimental computers performed self-diagnostics that pushed the boundaries of artificial intelligence. The climb into the cockpit felt like returning to a spiritual home she'd never really left. Every surface, every control, every display had been designed around human factors that transcended ordinary ergonomics, as if the engineers had understood that the pilot and aircraft would become a single entity rather than separate components of a weapons system. The neural interface engaged smoothly, expanding her awareness beyond the physical boundaries of her body, until she could feel the Ghost Raptor's systems as extensions of her own nervous system. "Tower, this is Nomad requesting clearance for departure," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her bloodstream. "Mission profile filed and verified. All systems green." The control tower's response came through her headset with the professional calm of people who'd learned to project confidence even when launching experimental aircraft into combat conditions that would test every assumption about modern aerial warfare. "Nomad, you are cleared for immediate departure. Winds calm, visibility unlimited. Good hunting." The tower controller's voice carried subtle warmth that suggested personal investment in her mission's success, the kind of emotional connection that developed between ground personnel and aircrew who shared dangerous responsibilities. Engine startup proceeded through sequences that felt more like awakening a sleeping predator than starting conventional machinery. The Ghost Raptor's twin power plants spooled up with harmonic frequencies that resonated through her bones, while thrust readings climbed toward numbers that shouldn't have been possible for an aircraft of this size. The neural interface fed her real-time performance data in formats that bypassed conscious processing, giving her intuitive understanding of capabilities that conventional training had never prepared her to exploit. Taxi clearance came immediately, routing her toward the active runway where dawn was beginning to paint the eastern sky in shades of gold and crimson that reminded her why she'd fallen in love with flight in the first place. The Ghost Raptor moved across the tarmac with the controlled power of something designed for speed, its landing gear absorbing irregularities in the surface, while its engines maintained thrust settings that could launch it skyward at a moment's notice. Nomad, you are cleared for takeoff. Climb to flight level 400 and proceed on course. Contact Overwatch on frequency 278.3 once airborne. The tower controller's final transmission carried the weight of professional responsibility mixed with personal hope, the knowledge that this might be the last communication before combat changed everything for everyone involved. Kestrel aligned the Ghost Raptor with the runway centerline, while her mind processed the mission parameters one final time. Enemy air defense networks stretched across hundreds of miles of contested airspace, manned by skilled operators using equipment designed specifically to counter American stealth technology. She would be flying alone into that hostile environment, relying on an experimental aircraft's capabilities and her own skills to accomplish objectives that an entire squadron of conventional fighters might struggle to achieve. Roger Tower, Nomad departing. She advanced the throttles to military power, feeling the Ghost Raptor surge forward with acceleration that pressed her back into the ejection seat despite the neural interface's inertial compensation systems. The runway markers flashed past her peripheral vision, while airspeed indicators climbed toward rotation velocity with the measured precision of a machine that had been designed to exceed every performance parameter of conventional aircraft. Liftoff occurred at the intersection of physics and artistry, the Ghost Raptor transitioning from ground operations to flight with the seamless grace of something born for three-dimensional movement. The landing gear retracted into wells that sealed automatically while the aircraft's stealth systems engaged, reducing its radar signature to something smaller than a sparrow despite carrying enough ordnance to level a small city. Below them, the Nevada desert spread out like a tactical map, while ahead lay the Pacific Ocean, and whatever enemy forces waited in the contested airspace above it. Overwatch. This is Nomad checking in at flight level 400, proceeding on course as assigned. The response came immediately, professional voices managing an operation that stretched across multiple time zones while coordinating assets that represented decades of technological development and billions of dollars in research and development. Nomad Overwatch. We have you on scope. Intelligence update. Enemy air activity has increased in your target area. Estimate 12 to 15 fighters operating in a defensive screen around high-value assets. Proceed with caution and maintain communication protocols. The controller's voice carried subtle tension that suggested the tactical situation was evolving faster than anyone had anticipated. Kestrel acknowledged the transmission while her mind automatically began revising tactical approaches based on the updated intelligence. 15 enemy fighters represented a formidable challenge, even for an aircraft as advanced as the Ghost Raptor. But the neural interface was already providing targeting solutions that took advantage of the prototype's revolutionary capabilities. This would be aerial combat at a level of sophistication that had never been attempted before, pitting experimental American technology against proven enemy systems, in an engagement that would determine the balance of power in the Pacific. The Pacific Ocean stretched beneath her like a blue-black canvas painted with whitecaps that caught the early morning sunlight, while ahead lay the invisible boundary where friendly airspace ended and the war zone began. Enemy radar signatures appeared on her threat display as ghostly contacts that flickered in and out of detection range, suggesting advanced stealth technology that matched or exceeded American capabilities. The Ghost Raptor's own sensors painted a tactical picture that existed in dimensions conventional pilots had never imagined, processing electromagnetic signatures and thermal gradients that revealed enemy positions with supernatural clarity. Nomad, be advised we're detecting increased electromagnetic activity in your area of operations, Overwatch transmitted, their voice carrying the controlled tension of people who were watching events unfold in real time while being powerless to directly influence the outcome. Recommend you activate full stealth protocols and proceed with extreme caution. Enemy early warning aircraft are maintaining station approximately 50 miles north of your current position. The Ghost Raptor stealth systems engaged with a subtle shift in the aircraft's electromagnetic signature, its revolutionary materials and design features combining to create a radar profile that existed at the very edge of detectability. Kestrel felt the change through the neural interface as a kind of ghostly transformation, as if the aircraft were fading from the physical world into something more ethereal and deadly. Her threat displays cleared of friendly radar contacts as Allied systems lost track of her position, leaving her alone in hostile airspace with only the experimental fighter's capabilities standing between her and enemy forces that had been specifically deployed to prevent exactly this kind of penetration. Roger, Overwatch, going silent until mission completion. She switched off her transponder and reduced power to non-essential systems, transforming the Ghost Raptor into a digital phantom that existed primarily in the electromagnetic shadows between enemy sensors. The neural interface compensated for reduced information flow by enhancing her natural spatial awareness, giving her an intuitive understanding of her position relative to threats that didn't require electronic confirmation. The first enemy contact appeared on her displays as a subtle distortion in the background electromagnetic environment rather than a solid radar return, suggesting advanced Chinese stealth technology that had been specifically designed to counter American detection systems. J-20 fighters, probably, flying in a defensive pattern that protected something valuable enough to risk their most advanced aircraft. The Ghost Raptor's computers began calculating intercept courses and engagement envelopes, while Kestrel's enhanced reflexes processed tactical options that conventional training had never prepared her to consider. Multiple contacts bearing 045, range approximately 30 miles, she whispered to herself, relying on the neural interface to record her observations for later analysis. Estimated 4 aircraft in defensive formation, probably screening for high-value target. The Ghost Raptor banked slightly to adjust her approach vector, its flight control systems making micro-adjustments that kept them in the electromagnetic shadows while positioning for optimal weapons engagement. The enemy fighters maintained their patrol pattern with the disciplined precision of pilots who understood they were protecting something critical to their nation's strategic.